This was the key man in US foreign policy in the second half of the 20th century. First as National Security Advisor and then as Secretary of State under Richard "I am not a crook" Nixon, Henry Kissinger was considered for years as the public face of realpolitik, pragmatism above all else. Beloved by some and targeted by others, his decisions shaped not only US foreign policy, but also the world as we know it today. Kissinger was one of the great architects of the opening of relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China, the end of the Vietnam War, and the launching of peace negotiations between Israel and Egypt, a process that years later culminated in the Camp David Accords, the first major peace agreement between Israel and an Arab country. Well, on the 27th of May 2023, Kissinger turned 100 years old. The reason why we at VisualPolitik wanted to prepare this video. Regardless of our personal opinions of Kissinger, he was undoubtedly one of the great players in international politics throughout the 20th century. Without him, today's world would look very different. Maybe better, or maybe worse, but in any case, definitely different. And that's why we want to answer a few questions with this video. Who exactly was Kissinger, and what did he represent for the Cold War balance of power? In what ways did he help shape our world? And what were his great successes, and what were his huge mistakes? Well, in this video, we're going to answer all of these questions. So, let's get cracking. The year is 1969. The United States has more than 26,000 nuclear weapons in its inventory, thousands of military bases scattered throughout Europe, and numerous fleets scattered across the world's seas. Everything is all set to fight against the Reds. The Cold War is going through its most difficult years, and it is a time when the world was a dangerous place. And we're not just talking about possible nuclear Armageddon. There was also the clash between India and Pakistan, the growing chaos in Latin America, the decolonization of Africa, and the Arab-Israeli conflict, among many other things. What's more, the fall of Nikita Khrushchev in the Soviet Union in 1964 and his replacement by Brezhnev meant a return to a harder line and a pause in any détente. Basically, we could say that the world had become one massive powder keg. Any spark could blow it all into 1,000 pieces. It had to be avoided. It was time to put on the brakes and reduce the tension. But the question is, how? Well, in November 1968, Republican Richard "I am not a crook" Nixon won the presidential election. It was then up to him to choose the new guide for international policy, and that is when the Kissinger era began. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The man we all know as Henry Kissinger was actually born Heinz Alfred Kissinger on the 27th of May 1923 in Bavaria in Germany, just 10 years before Nazism came to power. His family was German Jewish, so the arrival in 1933 of Adolf Hitler to power changed their lives forever. Nazi segregation measures gradually drove them out of civilian life until finally, in 1938, when Kissinger was 15 years old, his family managed to flee Germany first to the UK and then to the United States of America. Specifically, they ended up in New York, where he would end up enrolling at the City College to study accounting. As time went on, he acquired US citizenship in 1943, and that same year, he was recruited and sent to the European front, where, thanks to his German language skills and his local accent, he ended up as commander of the Counterintelligence Corps detachment in the Bergstrasse district of Hesse, which, if you stop to think about it, was a pretty surprising turn of events. Kissinger, who had arrived with his family fleeing Germany as a persecuted Jew, had returned to his native country as a US citizen with the mission of fighting an open war against the Nazi regime. Life's twists and turns, you know? Yet, the most momentous things were yet to come. You see, when Kissinger returned to the United States, something had changed in him. He no longer wanted to study accounting, and to be fair, who can blame him? His whole life had been deeply conditioned by political decisions, and now his passion for this activity had been irreversibly ignited. So as we say around here, no sooner said than done. In 1950, he graduated with honors with a degree in political science from Harvard University, and a few years later, he obtained his doctorate from Harvard University. And so, little by little, he was incorporated into the circles that shaped the country's international politics. Kissinger worked for the Council on Foreign Relations and State Department and the Rand Corporation. However, the role that would bring him one step closer to power was the offer he received to work as a foreign policy advisor for the presidential campaigns of Nelson Rockefeller, then governor of New York and opponent in the Republican primaries to Richard "I am not a crook" Nixon. Kissinger was positioning himself at the gates of power, but he wasn't yet inside.
A world on fire.
On the 5th of November 1968, Richard Milhouse Nixon won the presidential election, becoming the 37th president of the United States in a world that was anything but a peaceful and quiet place. And no, I am not exaggerating here. If today the war in Ukraine looks like a conflict capable of shaking the foundations of the international order, just imagine for one moment what the situation was like at the end of the 1960s. The United States had already lost nearly 17,000 soldiers in Vietnam. The Soviet Union had decided to invade Czechoslovakia, and the Middle East was a powder keg after the Six-Day War and the triumph of Egyptian nationalism. And let's not forget, at the same time, there were thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads capable of blowing up the world many times over. As if that were not enough, the assassination of President Kennedy, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and the definitive struggle against racial segregation were generating strong tensions within American society. This, VisualPolitik viewers, was the context facing the new Republican president, Richard Nixon, who was not a crook. After his election victory, Nixon invited Kissinger to his New York offices to get to know him better. And the meeting must have gone pretty well, because just after a few weeks, Nixon offered Kissinger nothing less than the position of National Security Advisor, the second highest ranking cabinet post that did not require Senate confirmation. The highest was that of the Chief of Staff himself. Of course, the expectation Kissinger had stirred up in Nixon did not seem to be reciprocated. To give you an idea, this is what his former boss, Governor Nelson Rockefeller, told our protagonist.
He chided me for postponing my decision and urged me to accept Nixon's offer immediately. When the president invites you to an important service, he observed, delay is not an appropriate response. Keep in mind, Rockefeller added, that Nixon is taking a much greater risk with you than you are taking with him. That same afternoon, I telephoned Nixon. Henry Kissinger, in his book, Leadership, 6 Studies in Global Strategy.
Today's protagonist already had his place at the very pinnacles of power, and this is where the whole story really begins. Check this out.
3 goals from the top corner.
In August 1968, in the midst of the US election campaign, Leonid Brezhnev ordered a military intervention in Czechoslovakia after this country, which was a member of the Warsaw Pact and led by President Alexander Dubček, announced a package of reforms for economic and political liberalization. This was something the Soviet Union was not prepared to consent to. At that time, the communist superpower was going through what Washington called the Brezhnevian stagnation. The Soviet economy had begun to show its first major cracks and was no longer able to keep up with the great United States. Well, despite the invasion of Czechoslovakia, Kissinger considered that was the perfect moment to promote a rapprochement. His theory was that the United States should not seek to make wood from the fallen tree with Soviet problems, but rather take advantage of the moment to bring around small changes. This is exactly what explains the visit of the former leader of communist Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, to Washington in 1969, and Nixon's subsequent visits to Yugoslavia, Poland, and naturally, also Moscow on multiple occasions. And the truth is that this strategy worked to some extent. Relations improved, and in 1971, the SALT Treaty was signed to limit the nuclear arsenal of both powers.
As you know, the Soviet-American talks on limiting nuclear arms have been deadlocked for over a year. As a result of negotiations involving the highest level of both governments, I am announcing today a significant development in breaking the deadlock.
Of course, the Cold War was not the only headache in Washington. By this time, the Vietnam War was already becoming a nightmare, a never-ending, increasingly costly and unpopular war. It was clear that the United States needed to find a way out, but how? Keep in mind, by the time Nixon was sworn in as president, the US had more than 500,000 troops deployed in Vietnam. This was an untenable situation. That is why the new president charged his cabinet to bring about the end of the war and the withdrawal of troops during his first term. You know, he couldn't let a little thing like a pesky war get in the way of his re-election chances. By 1973, the conflict was about to come to an end, something for which the Vietnamese revolutionary Lee Duc Tho and Henry Kissinger received the Nobel Peace Prize, although Kissinger did not accept it because he still considered that the conflict was ongoing.
And therefore, it is our firm intention in our relationship to the Democratic Republic of Vietnam to move from hostility to normalization, and from normalization to conciliation and cooperation. And we believe that under conditions of peace, we can contribute throughout Indochina to a realization of the humane aspirations.
It was not until 1975, with the fall of Saigon, that 20 years after it began, the military and political disaster for the United States came to an end once and for all. VisualPolitik viewers, his efforts to achieve a political thaw with the Soviet Union and his role in bringing about the end of the war earned Kissinger a promotion. And what a promotion! Without abandoning his post as National Security Advisor, Nixon also gave him the post of Secretary of State. And so, Henry Kissinger became one of the most important figures in the entire history of US international politics. Few people have accumulated so much weight in a cabinet. The new rock star of American international politics used this to deploy what is known today as shuttle diplomacy, triangular diplomacy. That is, seeking the rapprochement of two hostile countries through the intervention of a third actor who is friendly to both parties, which was precisely the strategy Kissinger employed in the Middle East. You see, 1973, as we've already told you, was a pretty busy year for the world. There was also the Yom Kippur War, where Egypt and Syria launched themselves against Israel. Well, Kissinger used this kind of triangular scheme to become the intermediary between the Israeli head of government, Golda Meir, and the Egyptian president, Anwar el-Sadat. And not only that, the new leader of US international policy also invited the Soviet Union to the round of negotiations. Kissinger even raised the possibility of creating a UN force composed of both superpowers to pacify the Suez Canal region. The idea did not take off, but US and Soviet troops side by side? Don't tell me the guy wasn't daring. The fact is that the Yom Kippur conflict ended in 19 days, and the rapprochement between Israel and Egypt, promoted by Kissinger, not only resulted in a ceasefire, but culminated in Sadat's visit to Israel at the end of 1977 and the 1978 Camp David Accords under the Carter administration. But let's recap. In just 4 years, Kissinger had achieved the exit from Vietnam, a historic rapprochement with the Soviet Union, a very significant nuclear agreement, and to top it all off, a ceasefire in the Middle East powder keg. Not a bad result for such a short time. However, hold on just a moment, because his great achievement, the work that has probably changed the world more than any other, was still to come. And yes, we're of course talking about China. Let's take a look.
China, the masterpiece.
Do you know, it is often thought that the idea of closer relations with China was Kissinger's, but in fact, this was a gamble that Richard Nixon had already advocated for years before he came to the White House. Take a look at this.
Taking the long view, we simply cannot afford to leave China forever outside the family of nations. There is no place on this small planet for 1 billion of its potentially most able people to live in angry isolation. Asia After Vietnam, paper published by Richard Nixon in Foreign Affairs, October 1967.
Kissinger and Nixon agreed on the diagnosis, but approaching Beijing was far from easy. What would happen to the commitments made with Taiwan? How do you go about approaching such a closed and hostile country? Was it really feasible to strengthen ties with Mao's China? Well, let's just say that Kissinger's ace in the hole was once again shuttle diplomacy. When Ceausescu visited the US in 1969, Nixon himself asked him to let Mao's government know that he wanted to establish talks between the two governments. Keep in mind that, at that time, Washington was still recognizing the Republic of China, that is, Taiwan, and not the People's Republic of China, as legitimate China. The fact is that Washington's offer fell on deaf ears. That is why the following year, Kissinger asked the US ambassador in Poland to convey the message to the first Chinese diplomat that he met. Not surprisingly, email was not really an option. How things have changed. The opportunity would come soon after at a Yugoslavian social event, and as a result, in December of 1970, the first official contact between Nixon and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai took place. This paved the way for Kissinger to make secret visits to Communist China in 1971 to agree on the terms of the new relationship that was about to be formed.
The secret trip was arranged by scheduling a visit by me to Vietnam, Thailand, India, and Pakistan. Once in Islamabad, an indisposition was announced that would explain my subsequent 2-day absence as a visit to a hill station to recuperate. The whole process, from Nixon's conversation with Yahya Khan on 25th October 1970 to my arrival in Beijing on 9th July 1971, lasted 8 months. Henry Kissinger, in his book, Leadership, 6 Studies in Global Strategy.
Shortly thereafter, the announcement of Nixon's own visit to China would herald a new era.
I have requested this television time tonight to announce a major development in our efforts to build a lasting peace in the world. As I have pointed out on a number of occasions over the past 3 years, there can be no stable and enduring peace without the participation of the People's Republic of China and its 750 million people.
On the 25th of October 1971, the UN Security Council definitively recognized the People's Republic of China as the authentic China. Despite this, however, Beijing never succeeded in getting the US to minimize its commitments to Taiwan.
We enjoyed enormously. But most important was the fact that we had the opportunity to have talks with Chairman Mao, with Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, with the Foreign Minister and other people in the government. The joint communique which we have issued today summarizes the results of our talks. But what we have said in that communique is not nearly as important as what we will do in the years ahead to build a bridge across 16,000 miles and 22 years of hostility.
In the case of China, Kissinger's position was that nations with firepower could not live on the margins of international system, diplomacy and the global order, because isolating them would end up provoking disruptive behavior. In that game, sacrificing recognition of Taiwan was something that was, shall we say, acceptable. It is the crude definition of what we know as realpolitik, a political strategy that, like Kissinger himself, has many admirers as well as many detractors.
Highs and lows.
The agreements with the Soviet Union, the reconciliation with China, the end of the Vietnam War, the peace negotiations in the Middle East. This is perhaps the best side of Kissinger's many political gambles. Other aspects, meanwhile, did not generate as much admiration, if any at all. For example, Kissinger did not hesitate to support different types of dirty wars and dictatorships in order to stop the spread of communism in Latin America.
Henry Kissinger turns 100, the controversial Nobel Peace Prize winner who supported the dirty war that left thousands dead in Latin America.
This one you're about to see, for example, is a well-known phrase that Kissinger addressed to Argentine Admiral Cesar Augusto Guzzetti, chancellor of the military coup led by George Rafael Videla that had been perpetrated just 3 months before.
If there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly. But you should get back quickly to normal procedures. Henry Kissinger.
It kinda seems clear what he's talking about, doesn't it? Repression and prosecution. Murder. Realpolitik at its best. Also, highly controversial was his policy of massively expanding the bombing of Cambodia and Laos to weaken the Viet Cong before sitting down with them to negotiate. Despite all this, a 2015 survey of American academics lists him as the most efficient Secretary of State in the last 50 years. Check this out. In the same vein, by the way, Kissinger today advocates dialogue with Putin's Russia. But be that as it may, one thing is clear. Despite his lights and shadows, and whether we are more or less in favor of this crude form of international politics in which anything goes, even if it means embracing the world's worst regimes, Kissinger helped to shape the world that we know today. Having said that, the questions now are over to you. What do you think of Henry Kissinger's legacy? What do you think of his commitment to realpolitik? Do you think his role was positive or negative? As always, leave us your impressions in the comments below and let's open a respectful debate. And now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to all of us here at VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. All the best, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.